In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the chromatic scale. Now, there's only one chromatic scale, unlike a major scale or a minor scale where there are 12 total majors and 12 total minors. There's only one chromatic scale, and you can actually start on any note. It's easiest if we look first at the keyboard. Now, the chromatic scale can begin on any note, but for our purposes, let's start with C. Now, a typical chromatic scale in its complete form is going to exist of all 12 notes of the scale. So starting with C is 1, all the way up to C sharp would be 2, then D would be 3, all the way up until we get to B, which is our 12th note. Now, the chromatic scale is really helpful when composers want to modulate, and it's also helpful when we're looking at specific intervals. So in one of our other lessons, we talked about how to find all of the intervals looking in a major scale, or all of the intervals looking in a minor scale. Well, the chromatic scale actually contains all of the intervals that are in existence. So for example, if we want to look at a minor second, then we can go from our C to C sharp. That would give us a minor second. Our major second then would be from C to a D. And if we go from our C to our E flat, that would give us our minor third. And of course, from C to E would give us our major third. So by going and using the chromatic scale, we can actually get all of our intervals that we need. Now, the one interval that we haven't talked about in our interval lesson is the interval of a tritone. Tritone is probably the most dissonant in terms of intervals, but it's also exactly in the middle of the scale, and it doesn't actually exist from the tonic up to anywhere in the scale in a major or minor scale. So the only way to find it is through the chromatic scale, unless you want to start on a note that's not the tonic in one of the other scales. So let's look at the tritone. So the tritone is when you start on, let's say again, C, and let's say we have our C to our C right here. Now the tritone is actually going to be directly cut in half. So if we count our intervals up from C, we have 1 for C sharp, and 2 for D, then 3, 4, 5, and 6. So this from C to our F sharp, we have 6 half steps. So I'm just going to put 6. Now from our F sharp to our top C, we should have 6 as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we do from F sharp to C. So if we cut the scale completely in half, we have what's called a tritone. So from C to F sharp is our tritone. Now the tritone used to be called the devil in music. So in church music, they didn't actually allow composers to write tritones. In fact, if you wrote tritones, it's thought to be heretical. So most composers in the 15th and to the 16th century would avoid doing that. Now, the tritone can actually exist in multiple places. It doesn't just have to be from a C to an F sharp. In fact, we can transpose our tritone up a half step. So let's say if we're going to start with C sharp, which means we're transposing from the initial C up a half step. That means that our new tritone is going to still be 6 half steps away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But this time, it's going to be a G and not an F sharp. So our C sharp to our G is going to be a tritone. So you can find a number of tritones by starting with one note and counting up or down 6 half steps, and that's how you'll get your tritone. And the chromatic scale is really useful for this. So I encourage you to play the chromatic scale on your keyboard, either on your phone or on a piano, and try to listen to what it sounds like. Oftentimes we'll start and end on the same note. So if we were to play a chromatic scale from G, we would start here on G and we would play G sharp, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, and then we would end on G before coming back down. Now in terms of a piano playing the chromatic scale, oftentimes what we do is we use our first finger, which is our thumb, for the first note, and then we skip a finger actually, and for the black key, we use finger 3. So we play 1, 3, 1, 3. Now when we get to this cluster right here of B, C, and C sharp, we use fingers 1, 2, 3. And then again from D to D sharp, we do 1, 3, And then this is another one of our weird clusters. So we would do 1, 2, 3, and then 1. So if you want to play this on an actual keyboard, this is the fingering that I would recommend. But if you're not a pianist or that seems difficult, then you can just use one finger for all of the notes, and that's fine for our purposes today. Now let's look at the chromatic scale on the grand staff, now that we've already looked at it on the piano keyboard. So if we were going to take a chromatic scale on the grand staff, it's not as easy to see, so that's why I like to do it on the keyboard first. And let's, for example, start in the bass clef, and let's just start on our first space, which is A. Now if I were to just draw one note per line, kind of like what we would do in the keyboard by going, white note or white key to a black key, then white key to a black key. If I go to like the white space or the space and then go up to the line and then space, line. Now that doesn't actually give us our chromatic scale. If you remember back to our video on scales, that just gives us our normal scale. Now in this case, I'm starting out to do an A minor scale. So we actually have to alter some of the notes because this A, let's say, is right there, and then this B is here, and this C is there. So we're missing the black keys here, and the D would be there, so we're missing the black keys. So we have to alter the notes on the staff to get our chromatic scale. So let's go back and start on C, because again, I think C is a little bit easier to understand. So if I were to start on C, which would be here, then I have to draw another C, but this time I have to alter the C. So what I would do is put a little sharp above the C. In fact, I'm going to get a smaller pen, so it's a little bit easier to fit more notes in. So we can start again with our C, and then the next one I have to alter the C, so it would be C sharp. And then of course, we'd go up to our next note, which is D, and then we have to alter D, make it D sharp, and then we go up to E, which is next. But of course, there is no black key above E, so therefore we can just use the next white key, which is F, but then F has a sharp, so we have to draw a sharp for that, and so on and so forth. Now we would keep doing this all the way up the scale from C to C if we wanted our full chromatic scale. Now I'm just drawing these lines to show you how they reference on the keyboard, but you don't actually have to draw those lines. That's not part of the chromatic scale. So what we want to do typically when we're drawing a chromatic scale is to make sure that we add those accidentals. Now if we're going down, oftentimes we can still use sharps, but we can also use flats if we wanted to. So let's say if I start on C and go down for our chromatic scale. Now the next note from C here would be a B, so I can just draw that in. But then the next note after B or below B is this black key. So typically speaking, with our enharmonic notes, we have a choice. We can do a sharp or we can use a flat for that, right? But even though it's got two names, with our chromatic scale, typically, if we're going up, we want to use sharps. And if we're going down, we want to use flats. Okay, so if we're going up, we try to use sharps. And if we're going down, we try to use flats. So for our purposes here, let's go C to B and then B flat. And then we'll do an A, and we'll do A flat, and then G, G flat, and then F to an E, and then we would need E flat, and so on, all the way back down to our scales. Now if you want to, just for our sake, we can even add some stems to make them a little bit more beautiful. It wasn't as beautiful as I had hoped, but there we go. Or we can draw them with whole notes, doesn't really matter. The only reason the stems matter is for the rhythm. And so if you're writing within a context like 4/4 or 3/4, then that's going to matter. But if you're just drawing it for an example, it doesn't matter if you use whole notes, half notes, quarter notes. Anyways, this is the chromatic scale. And again, remember, we can always start on any note. So we can start on E, we can start on F sharp, we can start on C. Now again, if we get in the habit of using sharps when we go up and flats when we go down, we'll be in the best shape. So I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much for watching.